There is just something about being in a crowd of people who love the same music as you do. That raw energy between the band and the audience, it feels electric, almost sacred. For one night, strangers became friends, and the outside world disappears. But have you ever let your morbid curiosity wander? What if the unthinkable happened? What if a fire broke out? Where would you run? What if the crowd turned in a crushing stampede and you couldn't move? Or worse, what if someone opened fire? I went on a disturbing rabbit hole and what I found left me stunned. These events happen more often than you think. And why some of them happen is even worse. Now, let's not waste any more time. This is the iceberg chart about the worst concert disasters. Part 1. AstroWorld. Starting with the deadliest rap concert in American history. You'd think by now, with all the technology, planning and security available, disasters like this would be a thing of the past. Packing 50,000 people in a venue should be impossible to manage. And yet, AstroWorld 2021 proved otherwise. The festival was held by Travis Scott, and it's one of the biggest rap festivals of the last decade. Travis Scott, on the other hand, became famous with his unique blend of hip-hop, rap and psychedelic sounds paired with chaotic, high-energy shows. On stage, he was known for encouraging people to rage, often telling them to break past the barriers. In fact, before 2021, he had already been charged multiple times with initiating riots and disorderly conduct at shows where fans were even injured. But back to November 5th, 2021, and on that day, his fans begged him to stop multiple times, but he didn't. The crowd started to rage and started to push forward. The security had already been struggling the whole day with broken barricades, gate crushers and overstretched medical teams. But Travis was continuing to perform his act like he didn't care, and many blamed him for the deaths involved. As fans pressed forward, the crush happened, and their bodies were packed. People were basically trapped and unable to move their arms or extend them to reach to the air. Survivors described being crushed so hard they couldn't breathe, with some collapsing while still on their feet. Others were knocked out and buried under piles of bodies, with 2 or 3 layers of people stacked on top of each other. Some even tried to crowd surf unconscious victims to safety, while others just screamed for the show to be stopped. Even trying purposely to interrupt the show while chanting to stop, but with no success. To make it even worse, Travis, in midst of all of this, wanted them to go full berserk and started to rage. Now what did the security and medical team do? Well, nothing. Not because they didn't want to, but because of the chaos. They couldn't reach those suffocating just a few feet away, and they were severely understaffed for such a huge concert. The result was catastrophic. 10 people died, including a 9-year-old boy, and hundreds were injured. Survivor later said, "It felt like being buried alive." The tragedy played out in real time across social media videos, sparking outrage worldwide. In the aftermath, the festival faced hundreds of lawsuits, with accusations of overselling tickets, ignoring warning signs, and failing to stop the show even as fans begged them for. AstroWorld is now remembered as a symbol of modern-day crowd safety failure, and perhaps we can all blame it on corporate greed. Woodstock 99. Where Woodstock 69 stood for peace, love and harmony, Woodstock 99 is remembered as one of the biggest music festival disasters ever, a weekend that spiraled into chaos, fire and riots. The original Woodstock was fronted by anti-war artists, preaching unity. Sure, it had its own problems like rain, but nothing close to what went down 30 years later. What is very important to understand is how by the late 90s the music scene had shifted drastically. Grunge and alternative rock dominated the charts, singing about darker, more troubled themes, and right behind them, The rise of aggressive nu metal started with giants like Korn and Limp Bizkit. Pair that with a frustrated crowd and you got the recipe for a disaster. The festival was held in July 1999 on a former Air Force base in Rome, New York. Over 200,000 people were crammed into a suffocating venue where temperature reached 100 Fahrenheit or 38 degrees. What made it worse that the organizers gouged the crowd with overpriced $4 water bottles. Remember, this was in 1999. Then the sanitation quickly collapsed and raw sewage started spilling across the grounds. So people were exhausted, dehydrated and furious. And instead of a lineup that would promote peace and unity, they gave them a soundtrack to let their rage out. By Saturday night, the crowd was boiling. Korn's set turned into a violent mosh pit with 250,000 people surging like a wave. Then came Limp Bizkit and Fred Durst, who was like a huge middle finger to everyone at the time. The most infamous moment was when the song Break Stuff started. To much surprise, people started to break stuff. Fans ripped plywood from the sound towers and tried to surf on them. Then the mosh pits turned into violent brawls. Security was basically hopeless and outnumbered, and there was no end to this chaos. But the real collapse happened on Sunday night during the Red Hot Chili Peppers set, as they decided to cover the last song that was played on Woodstock 69, Jimi Hendrix's Fyre. But promoters stupidly handed out candles for a peace vigil, but the crowd had something else in mind and instead lit massive bonfires, torched vendor booths and started to riot. There was a lot of material damage, but I don't blame them, the people were pissed off. But this isn't where things stop, sadly. Besides the arson and the violence, there were also some sexual harassments, with even some cases where a group of young males held up a smaller sized girl and proceeded to essay her. And apparently this wasn't an isolated case. It is widely believed that a far greater number of underreported incidents like this occurred.
Soon, the concert goers were out of control too.
Later, it was even confirmed that 3 people died there. What was meant to be a tribute to peace and love became a corporate cash grab that showed zero concerns for safety and not understanding the climate of the industry at all.
I can't give you an explanation. I guess there were just kids blowing off some steam, but it got out of hand. In this case, my sense is that it was a mistake, that these kids did not intend to do what happened.
But it did.
The event was described by fans like it was a scene where zombies are coming over the castle walls, with the morning after, the 4th day, being described as being like in Bosnia. And I just found it hilarious that this sits at the top of the wiki page. Woodstock 99 didn't just fail to live up its legacy, it burned it to the ground. The last attempt at Woodstock Festival was Woodstock 50, which was planned for the 50th anniversary of the original festival in 2019, but it was ultimately cancelled. And I do think it's for the better, as the original Woodstock climate was magical and it can't be revived, I think. And a small thing to add here is that many journalists called Woodstock 99 as the day the 90s died. Indiana State Fair collapse.
Questions about safety are swirling this morning after that deadly stage collapse.
August 13, 2011. The Indiana State Fair was packed with thousands waiting for Sugarland. You already know my music tastes and a good chunk of them can be found on this list. So I had to Google Sugarland, and what I found out that they are quite a popular American country duo. But what was important here is that something was brewing in the background. Just minutes before the show, a severe storm started to roll in. Organizers later claimed they couldn't have predicted, even though the official storm warning had already been issued. But the problem is, even if they decided to delay the show, the whole tour could be put in jeopardy. With a small delay, they decided to proceed with the concert anyway. As the opening acts had finished and the stage was set, Sugarman's tour manager was alerted that the storm was coming much sooner than they think. The manager proceeded to tell the people there will be a small delay.
As you can see to the west, there are some clouds. We are all hoping for the best, that the weather is going to bypass us, but there's a very good chance that it won't.
And this happened at 8:45 p.m. But then, just 1 minute later, strong winds tore across the grounds with heavy air, and without a warning, massive stage structure gave in. The lighting truss and roof of the stage were blown forward onto the crowd waiting in the front. Suddenly, people started to scream in panic. Many fled and others tried to help the people who were trapped beneath the wreckage.
I turned and looked behind, and the top of the stage was probably about 10 feet from us.
Are you okay?
By the time the rescue teams arrived, the damage was already devastating. 7 people were killed because they were crushed beneath a steel structure, and over 50 were injured.
Spectators rallied to the rescue, trying with their bare hands to free those pinned by the massive mangled metal.
People rushed to move the chairs out of the way that were blocking access to picking up the debris, and started trying to lift the stage.
What made this whole tragedy worse was how preventable it seemed. There had been issues about the incoming storm, yet the concert was not delayed or evacuated until it was too late. Later investigations revealed that the stage had design flaws and wasn't properly reinforced to withstand such high winds. The Indiana State Fair Commission brought in Thornton Tomasetti, the same engineer firm that investigated the World Trade Center collapse on 9/11 and the Minneapolis bridge disaster to figure out what went wrong. And their findings were brutal. The stage support system was dangerously underbuilt, according to him. To not get too much technical here, the stage relied on so-called jersey barriers, giant concrete blocks just sitting there, held in place by their own weight. In theory, they were supposed to keep the stage steady with guy wires, at least in theory. In practice, they started to slide when the wind hit 59 miles per hour or 95 kilometers per hour. Later, it was found out that the system was only rated for 25 to 40 miles per hour. The whole thing was like a house of cards waiting to be taken down. We can't blame this solely on the weather, but rather it was a mix of bad engineering, ignored warnings, and the organizers gamble with people's safety. This is just proof that when corners are cut and greed takes over, the innocent need to pay the price. Paris concert attack. The night of November 30, 2015 is a night that Paris will remember for decades to come. This night was a part of a large coordinated attack. But I wanna pull your attention to the Bataclan Theater. That night, 1,500 rock fans gathered to watch the American rock band Eagles of Death Metal. Despite their name, they don't play death metal, and their sound mixes garage rock with blues. Formed in 1998 by Jesse Hughes and Josh Homme of Queens of the Stone Age, this was a regular Friday night for everyone. Nobody could imagine the horrors that was about to unfold. Midway through the set, weird popping sounds erupted. At first, some thought it was the pyrotechnics as a part of the show, and nobody even reacted to it. Then the popping started once again. But when the crowd in the back started to scream and the band members stopped playing, it was clear that something was terribly wrong. The fans then saw how heavily armed men had stormed the venue. The two men who walked in worked in a perfect balance. One was providing covering fire while the other was reloading to ensure maximum efficiency. Panic took over, people screamed and trampled one another while desperately searching for a way out. Other groups tried to barricade themselves in the backstage rooms. For many, there was no way to run. The attackers reloaded again and again, hunting down anyone inside. Some fans tried to play dead to survive, but according to survivors later, the terrorists walked among those who were lying down kicked them, and shot them if they heard any sign of life. The band members weren't hurt, except the merchandise seller who was at the front of the venue. Many never made it out alive, and at 23:30, an elite police squad entered the building, and upon having a battle with them, one of the attackers set off an explosive device. The other attacker wanted to flee upon seeing his friend activating the device, but he was mortally wounded by the explosion. As the night ended, the devastation was staggering. 90 people lay down inside the theater, and it was like a scene from a movie. Nobody could comprehend that something like this could even happen. This attack was a part of a wider series of coordinated attacks across Paris that killed 130 people in total. The Pt.1 theater was targeted specifically, not just because of the crowd, but because it symbolized something. The Western nightlife and freedom. The was meant to punish for the French military strikes against the attackers' organizations. In the aftermath, the Eagles of Death were deeply shaken. They cancelled the rest of the tours, but then eventually decided to return to Paris just months later, and they dedicated their performance to the victims of that night. It was an attack that left a scar on Paris that will be remembered for generations to come.
I felt so guilty in a way that, like, I had left Matt on the stage and maybe Davey too, and I didn't want anything to have happened to them, and I really needed them to have gotten off the stage because I didn't see what happened when we got off, and Joshua wouldn't let me.
Fyre Festival.
In a panic at one point in the dead of night. She couldn't find her friend. She was lost. She seemed like she was drunk. I mean,
this is one of the most absurd entries on the list. What was sold as a luxury music festival of the decade quickly turned into one of the most infamous scams in entertainment history. Fyre Festival was marked with supermodels, private jets, luxury villas, and gourmet food. Basically, it looked like Epstein's Island, just without the kids. And to make it even more sketchier, the island chosen has supposedly once belonged to the infamous Pablo Escobar.
This was Pablo Escobar's island 25 years ago. So we're taking the dream for your average person in America or wherever they are and saying for 3 days you could become Pablo Escobar.
This event supposed to be a paradise getaway, where influencers party along the celebrities. In reality, it felt like an episode of The Survivor. The date is April 2017, the Bahamas. When the guests arrived on the island, the dream collapsed instantly. Instead of villas, they were met with disaster relief FEMA tents. And I'm not kidding.
Our strategy from there was to kind of ransack all the tents around us. Just started poking holes and flipping mattresses, and my buddy pissed on a few of the beds.
Their luggage was thrown off the tracks in the dark. There was no real security, no working toilets, no electricity, and to make it all worse, all of the performers backed out. Whether you paid $1,000 or $7,000, it didn't matter. Everyone was fighting tooth and nail to get the same moldy tent. The event basically turned into a free-for-all deathmatch to claim a tent and a mattress. The chaos escalated overnight. Flights were cancelled, people were stranded without food or water, and many had no way to get home. They even called the embassy to help them. But let's back up the story and see who was behind of all of this. This brings us to a wannabe entrepreneur named Billy McFarland, and none other than the rapper Ja Rule. Together they used their influences and glossy ads to sell this fantasy, but the problem was they didn't have the money to make it actually happen. That's why the performers pulled out. But at least the beach was filled with sharks, feral dogs roamed the camps at night, toilets were overflowed, and they had lockers with no locks, so the locals were mugging their attendees for their stuff. And about that private island, it wasn't even an island, it was a part of a resort. In the end, at least 8 lawsuits were initiated against the organizers for defrauding ticket buyers. In the aftermath, Billy McFarland was convicted of fraud and sentenced to 6 years in prison, and the concert goers documented every embarrassing detail on social media, and the whole thing became a meme, and there is even a Netflix documentary made about it. Plus, this festival was used as a case study on how not to organize a music festival. Compared to some of the disasters on this iceberg, Fyre Festival looks tame. I mean, nobody was badly hurt or died, but it's still a reminder of how blind hype and influencer culture can scam thousands of people into buying a fantasy. Always double check who you follow and what you buy. Ariana Grande, Manchester. This entry is a proof that there is no rules when it comes to disaster. This is American pop star Ariana Grande waving goodbye to her friends in Manchester on May 22, 2017. What looked like a perfect normal show turned into a tragedy within moments. The Manchester arena was packed with 14,000 people, mostly teenagers, children and their parents. Ariana Grande was performing her Dangerous Woman tour and the tickets sold like hot cupcakes. And this night felt like every other concert of that tour, but as soon as the lights came on, and fans began heading for the exit. At 10:31 PM, a strange noise was heard that sounded like an explosion.
Oh my god.
The people in the arena didn't know that a suicide bomber detonated the explosive device in the lobby of the venue. Panic erupted instantly, people screaming, rushing towards the exit, unsure of what just happened, while others were commentating that people are just overreacting. That came from the fact that, again, they didn't know what actually happened.
People hear a bang and then they panic. Yeah, well, running in one direction doesn't make any sense.
The aftermath was more than devastating. 22 people were killed, the youngest just 8 years old. And over 800 others were injured according to Wiki. Parents were separated from the children and emergency responders rushed into what survivors later described as a scene of pure horror. It looked completely surreal, they said, with body parts being scattered everywhere you look. And after looking at the photos, it's beyond horrifying. According to one police account, they could only identify one victim by a tattoo on his leg, because the rest of his body has been completely destroyed in the blast. Many survivors were left not only with physical injuries, but also with deep psychological trauma that will haunt them for their lives. According to the investigators, the bomb was an improvised device packed with nuts and screws designed to maximize casualties. Images later revealed it has been carried in a small black vest. The attacker had ties to extremist group. I'll keep the name vague here since YouTube doesn't exactly like those words. But it was the same group behind the Paris attack. Now I hate to do this, but I just want to remind you to smash that like button and consider subscribing, because it really helps push videos like this out. To prove my point, here is a poll I ran. People with notifications on still told me they never saw my video. So if you want to support a small creator covering this kind of content, that little click means more than you think. Thank you. Ariana Grande at the time was devastated. But just 2 weeks later, she returned to the city to headline the One Love Manchester benefit concert, joined by Coldplay and Justin Bieber among many others. They managed to raise millions of dollars for the victims' family, and they became a symbol of resilience in the face of terror. Sadly, this attack also triggered a rise in anti-Muslim hate crimes in the greater Manchester area, according to the police. And it just shows how deep and long-lasting the scars of that night would be. And I hope the layer 1 sets the tone of this video, because as we dive deeper, it will only get more disturbing.
Overcome all of that and get back on stage?
Well, I think just looking at my fans and the way that they responded to it, and like of course the city of Manchester and how they responded to it with so much like unity and strength and love and like fearlessness.
The Station Nightclub.
West Warwick, Rhode Island tonight, the remains of the rock and roll club known as the Station are being treated as a crime scene.
Great White is an American rock band with a long and interesting history. But let's explore their darkest day. On February 20, 2003, the Great Whites were on an 18-date tour, and as you can expect from a rock band, they wanted to have flames and fireworks on the stage. But it was something that many club owners had already banned them from using, warning them it was unsafe and some of their clubs were not up to standards when it comes to fire safety. But at the Station Nightclub in West Warwick Road, they went ahead with it anyway. The venue was small, just over 460 people packed inside. It wasn't a stadium show, but it was one of those small shows where you would get a quite personal vibe with the band. Moments into their opening song, Desert Moon, their tour manager set up the pyrotechnics. The problem was that there were not just shots being fired vertically, but also at a 45 degrees angle, directly heading into the cheap soundproofing foam on the club's walls. Everyone in the crowd started shouting and pointing to the small fire that started behind the band. Within seconds, the foam ignited. What began as a flicker of fire exploded into an inferno. Thick black smoke filled the club almost instantly, and this wasn't ordinary smoke. Burning soundproof foam released toxic and choking fumes. That's why the visibility dropped to zero. People couldn't breathe and panic erupted. The station only had a few exits, and because most of the crowds rushed through them at once, a stampede formed. People were crushed just to get out. In under 6 minutes, it was over. That night, 100 people were dead, and more than 200 were injured. One of the victims was even the band's own guitarist, Di Longley, who first escaped the club and went back inside to try to save his guitar, and he never made it out. The blame quickly fell on the tour manager, who was the one who set the fireworks off. He was charged with 100 counts of involuntary manslaughter, and he pleaded guilty and served about 4 years in prison. But they also blamed the club owners, the brothers Jeffrey and Michael Derderian, who were charged with 200 counts of involuntary manslaughter. One brother served 3 years in prison and the other received community service. Investigators later revealed that every signal of safety had failed. The soundproofing foam was highly flammable and not up to code. The club had no sprinkler system, which could have stopped the fire in its tracks, and the exits weren't properly marked or accessible, with even one bouncer that didn't let the people use the exit because it was for members only, and I don't have any comment on that. Great White eventually toured again, dedicating shows to the victims and raising money for the surviving families. But no amount of fundraising could erase the stain of the station fire, and at the place of the club a memorial has been built.
So I said, okay, that's another step, I'm closer to getting out of here. And then I said, okay, now I'm just going to wait until I feel the water.
So how long were you under this pile?
They pulled me out about 12:30. I was in there a good hour and a half.
So the club had burned?
It burnt down all around me, yes.
On Low Parade 2010. How many of you are familiar with the Low Parade? It was an electric dance music festival and a techno parade that started back in 1989 in West Berlin. What became a celebration of peace, love and techno culture grew into a massive annual event, drawing hundreds of thousands of people from around the world. It almost felt that the Low Parade wasn't just another music festival, it was like a cultural phenomenon in Europe, especially in the 90s and 2000s. And if you don't know anything else about the Low Parade, all you really need to know that this meme was filmed there, the one and only Techno Viking. But here's the thing, do you know why the Low Parade disappeared? Because techno died? Well, that's definitely not the case, but there is a good reason why we didn't get one of these for over 15 years. Let's go back to 2010 so I can explain you what happened in Duisburg, Germany. The organizers estimate that over 1.4 million people will attend the festival. Think about that number for a second. Trying to keep that many people safe and organized is already a nightmare. But the real problem wasn't the crowd itself, as many would assume. It was once again the planning. Something you wouldn't expect from Germany. If there is one thing Germans are known for, it's efficiency, organization and safety. And of course throwing parades of all kinds. But this venue had only one main entrance, a narrow tunnel leading into the festival grounds. Even on paper, this sounds like a disaster. And the day of the event, it played out exactly that way. As hours have passed, more and more people tried to push through. The tunnel became dangerously overcrowded. Thousands of people were shoulder to shoulder, trapped with no room to move forward or back. They were like sardines in a can, you could say. Some people even started climbing walls, poles and electrical towers just to escape the crush. At around 5 PM, things hit a breaking point. People were pinned against the concrete walls, suffocating under the pressure. Others were trapped as the human wave surged forward. Panic spread, but there was simply not much people could do. By the time the police finally got control, the damage was already horrific. 21 people were killed and more than 400 were injured. The shock wasn't just felt in Germany, but worldwide. How could a festival of love and unity end in such kind of horror? Later investigations revealed that the city of Duisburg had already raised concerns about the venue's capacity and safety, but organizers ignored those warnings and determined to push ahead. The fallout was immediate. The Low Parade was permanently cancelled. The name that once stood for peace and music culture was now forever associated with tragedy and loss.